Welcome back to Roots and Relevance. We are starting a new series today on the Book of Esther. And I'm not sure what your background is on Esther. Maybe like when you hear Esther, you think about a VeggieTales episode. Maybe you think about a flannel graph telling of the story. It's like kind of this children's story. We're gonna do a deep dive over the next weeks. And so today, before we actually get into the text, we just wanted to do an episode kind of where we set things up first. And this has been an interesting week. As of this recording, yesterday, the big news was Musk versus Trump. And I had to laugh because in this story, it's about a king and one of the people that's kind of by his side. And the guy that's by his side absolutely goes a little bit bananas, a little bit crazy. And Haman.
Could there be a more predictable outcome of that relationship than what is happening there?
Oh, no. It wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when.
It's the most ridiculous thing ever. But anyway.
But no, it's funny because I was thinking about this morning. Is there like the link there? I do think, because we're going to talk a lot about this, there are a lot of power dynamics in the Book of Esther. And when you get two people that have a lot of power, like it doesn't usually tend to go well, you know? So
yeah, that's the way it should work in marriage.
That's why
all the power,
that's why
right?
That's
all
why
you
you've exiled me.
egalitarians.
that's right.
That's why you've exiled me on remote now. Yes, you didn't want me to say it right.
We've cast you out. So like, I think the place to start then is, and it is, I know it's a hotly contested question among like commentators and scholars, is like, what type of book is Esther? I mean, is it a political thriller? Is it just straight up history? Is it a parable? We just got done with a series on parables. Is it just this like nice parable that happens to be rooted in history? Or is it something altogether different? And I'm curious what you guys think about that. Like, what do you think?
Can I start?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Do we have a choice?
Yeah, no, you don't. Let's first start that it's not a book; it's a scroll.
All right. What do you
like
mean
that?
by that?
It's actually originally was a scroll. It wasn't a book. They call it what is it? A megalot. Is that how you say it? Megaloth?
Megillah.
Is that how you say it? Really?
That's how David Foreman says it.
Okay. Well, then that's got to be right then. So anyway, I think this is a historical fiction.
Oh, wow. Interesting. And when you say historical fiction, Jonathan, you and I had a conversation a while back about
Real people, but the story is a little bit, I shouldn't say it's fiction. It's historical. I'm going to call it that way.
Yeah, I think the term we saw at one point was fictionalized history, right? Like it's history, but like in the way like a Saturday Night Live sketch might redo something.
Is that the word? Did I mess that up? I guess I messed that up. I just actually read it this morning.
I think different people call it different things, to be honest. But what you're saying is you actually think, if I understand it happened, but there's exaggerations and there are things that are in there to make a point. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think so. I think there were probably real people, but I do think it's a very hyperbolic description of what could have occurred in the courts of Susa in this Persian Empire with supposedly Xerxes.
Supposedly Xerxes, yeah. Which, I mean, I think Xerxes is the king that most scholars like would recognize as being in this time period. Wally, I guess you could tell us why he's wrong.
I cannot wait.
I think it's history, and I think it's a historical narrative, because I'm of the opinion that even though the events sound exaggerated, even though the events sound a little bit ridiculous, and it almost looks like a play. I mean,
It is a play.
If you were writing a play, a good story always has a good author, and a good author always has a good process by which they're telling the story. And so for me, all these exaggerated events that sort of take place in this story, I think points to a divine sovereign purpose, plan, and author of this story. And I think they're real people with real events, like I did with Jonah. I think this book and Jonah are historical narrative.
So in your mind, everything happened. Like if it says this happened, it happened.
Yes.
And Jonathan, is that true of you? Are you saying if it's saying this happened, it may have happened, but it might just be the author trying to get across a point?
Yes,
Okay.
I do. I think that's what I believe. And I don't think and so this begs the question, which as I was going to ask you two smart guys today. Do you think as people that would say that we believe in Jesus and justified us and we think we read the Bible, is it when we approach, say, something in the Bible, in this case, the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and we get to a book like Esther and we're like fearful to say, oh gosh, it has to be this really solemn, holy thing. I'm not saying it's not holy because it is holy, but it's this solemn, sanctified thing that we can't say anything other than that we had the camcorder, God was doing these things, and this is what was happening. Do you think we're fearful of that because it says something about God? I know we had this conversation when we did the Jonah series, but I think it's worth saying it again because we're going to run across a lot of literary devices, a lot of exaggerated, hyperbolic phrases. We're going to talk about how the author wrote it because you hear more from the narrator than you do from the people. There's very little dialogue that you hear. You just hear a commentary of the dialogue. So I think it's important to say, are we scared? Are we fearful? Is there something sacrilegious if we look at Esther as something that may be comedic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious
Go ahead.
what you would say, but I think, and we did talk a little bit about this in our series in Jonah, which is that for years, I think in churches, we have actually been afraid to ask any questions about anything lest we be cast aside. And you look at a book like Jonah, for example, and if you believe, and I know that you actually believe it's way more than history, but there are a lot
Yes.
of people that just nope, like Jonah's just historical narrative. And if you do that, you miss, I think, the biggest, most important truths out of that book. And I do think for way too long, evangelicals in particular have been afraid of critical scholarship because they're afraid that it might poke holes in what they grew up with, the flannel graph story, or this like vision of what they think inerrancy means and looks like. And in the meantime, they actually miss out on some of the bigger truths. That's kind of where
Well,
I'm at.
I think what has been the driving force, especially within the denomination that we're most familiar with, the Southern Baptist Convention, since the conservative resurgence in the early 80s, is that you start questioning these things about Scripture, and it's a slippery slope to questioning all Scripture, and that's a scary. That's a scary.
Is that not what power over is about, though? You can't question the king because if you question the one that holds all the information and holds all truth, if you dare question him, then oh my gosh, then all truth goes away.
Well, I think what has happened is that I think sometimes within the Southern Baptist Convention, we become, how shall I say it, that we have to stay within our tribe. If you step outside our tribe, then you're stepping outside of truth.
Correct.
Yeah, bounded set.
Yeah.
And so I've adopted sort of the mentality. I see truth where I find it.
Yeah.
Now, just because I'm SBC doesn't mean everything SBC is truth. I believe they try to do the truth and they try to do the things. They try to hold the scriptures the right way. I think, for me, I think they do hold the scriptures in the right way. But I think to say outside that tribal set that there's not wisdom to be found in understanding some different aspects of scripture that maybe we miss out on.
Whether it's like a rabbi
Oh,
or someone that is coming, like an African theologian or an Asian
Yes,
theologian,
absolutely.
dare I say a woman theologian.
We can-
I know.
We can't go that
Yeah.
far. We can't go that
Hey,
far.
I have an Evelyn Shushaki book in my. I don't read it anymore, but I have an Evelyn Shushaki book.
Because you found out it was a woman.
No, I knew it was a woman when I read it in my liberal days, but Paul the Bible is about the whole issue of nature.
Well, let me go back to my question though. So I think yeah, Wally, I agree. You went off on the SBC Southern Baptist Convention and their faith and belief and all that. But what I would like to propose is, like we did with Jonah, I don't think it's sacrilegious or heretical to look at the Book of Esther in a different light. Of did this really occur? If it did really occur, did it really occur this way? Did the king really just all of a sudden say annihilation of the Jews that quickly, but he can't make a decision on other things? Did we really have a beauty contest? Did we? Those things, I think, is it fair to say that we can at least question and have conversation and not be sacrilegious and not be heretical with Yahweh?
Well, so a couple things. I think, and we talked about this in Jonah as well, that first off, the very question of like, did all of this happen? Can we just recognize, at least wherever we are, that that is that's a question rooted in our time and in our culture, in our view, that we get like super focused on. And so one of the things I would say is that one of the things that all three of us agree is that whatever is happening, the narrator and the author is giving more truth than just straight up history. Is that fair?
And we can all agree that we know the author is not Esther.
Right.
Or anybody that was in this series of events, right? It's not a
Correct. Although
account.
some scholars will try to say that Mordecai was the author. I don't buy it, but there are some.
We could say this is not a first-hand account.
Exactly.
Right? Would you agree with that?
You talking to me? Yes, absolutely. This is not a camcorder like Jonah down under the water and seeing what Jonah's going through to Sheol. This is an oral tradition of stories that over time became written and later canonized that now we're reading and discussing today. Yes, I agree with you 100%.
And I think, so that means if you're listening and you believe that every single event and every detail happened exactly as it is, this is going to be a great series for you, because you're going to see that, but then you're going to see the deeper truths of the way it's written that might give you a different angle. And if you're not a church person, or maybe you're a de-church person, you used to be in church and you're not sure whether you know what you believe in the Bible anymore, like there's stuff for you here as well, right? Because even if you don't believe it all happened, you're going to see some truths in here that are pretty profound and pretty amazing.
You know, a lot of commentators will say that this was probably the last book written, right?
Right.
Time-wise.
Or at least canonized.
Yeah.
At least canonized, for sure.
Even though it's not the last book within, say,
the order,
the Protestant order of the Old Testament, nor even the Tanakh, the Jewish order of the Old Testament, that this was probably the latest book written. I think Josephus talks about the books that have been written up until the time of Artaxerxes or this king at this time. So we can assume probably this is maybe the latest book written within the Old Testament. So if that's the case, why are they writing this book, right? Why, if this is the last book that was written, why are they writing this book here and now for the Jewish people?
And that's,
okay, and to answer your question, let me overlay another question. I mean, I think you can answer why for several reasons. You know, I've read a commentary. I'm reading Adele Berlin. He does the JPS Bible commentary. Very interesting. Probably a little bit progressive, but I'm enjoying it greatly. He says, I think it's a he. He says that the main reason it's written is for the understanding of why Purim came to be. He says that's the whole point of the book. Now, I don't know that I agree with that, but I think the question is, we understand maybe why it was written, but why was it canonized? Why was it included in what we would consider God's holy word and included in the Tanakh, or the Old Testament, as we would call it?
and are you talking about Esther 1.0 or Esther 2.0?
Exactly. And so then we got to get into how it was changed later on in the Septuagint, and why was it changed? Go ahead.
For a second, because I don't think people probably even know about that piece. So when you say that?
What is the Septuagint?
No, you go ahead, because you're the expert on that one. It's been a couple of weeks since I studied that.
I'm really not, but I'll just give you the basics are, and we'll get into this in a minute, is that Esther, even to this day, Esther 1.0, in its earliest form,
The Hebrew version.
is a little bit controversial. Was it, you said yesterday, Martin Luther?
Martin Luther said it was the most Jewish of all.
Yeah, which, come on, Luther. Like,
It was
yeah.
aggressively Jewish, I think.
Aggressively Jewish, coming from
that's what Luther would
some
say.
of Martin Luther's anti-Semitic remarks. He did not like Esther. And there's a question, right, of why is God never mentioned? The characters are incredibly, secular in the sense that they're doing a lot of drunkenness, a lot of partying, a lot of sex, a lot of political maneuvering, and it doesn't look very spiritual. And you're talking about yesterday about how they didn't even observe the Jewish dietary laws. Is that right?
Well, not just dietary, but they're marrying Jewish. The uncle is telling his his niece to marry a non-Jew.
Right.
But he was the king, so there are some exceptions, aren't there?
I guess so. Yeah. So
You can marry rich as easy as you can marry poor. Is that
There you go. There's always an exception, some rule.
So a little bit later on, for the Greek Septuagint, which is again that's the translation into
the Hebrew into Greek?
the Hebrew into Greek, they fixed all that, right? And in fact, so the Catholic version and the Orthodox version of the Bibles have Esther 2.0, where now, whereas in Esther 1.0, it talks about them fasting, but doesn't say who they're fasting to. They're just fasting. We know that Haman refused to bow, but why did he refuse to bow? There's no mention of why. Was it because he was worshiping Yahweh? All these things that were missing in Esther 1.0 now come in Esther 2.0 in a much more explicit way. And so that goes to this idea of this tradition that kind of continued to build over time. And so I think that's like a really, really important thing. So yeah, go ahead, Jonathan.
No, I just say, why was it included in the canon? What's our thoughts? Are we there yet?
Well, I think we can go there. Sort of leads
Yeah.
into. I think it's included in the canon because even though God is not mentioned, we see God's hand definitely working in each one of these circumstantial situations that we find the story following in this process. And so we see that it is definitely providential. We see it as fulfilling. It's fulfilling Genesis chapter 12, where God says to Abraham that through you all the world will be blessed. We see the Jewish people blessing a foreign nation that they're in exile to. We see Mordecai saving the king from an attempted assassination plot. We see a lot of these things that are Old Testament themes from the beginning of Genesis up until the end of this Old Testament that we see playing out in Esther that I don't think runs contrary to the rest of the Old Testament narrative, but runs alongside and sort of helps bring to light some of these things without being so directly saying God's doing these things.
And to defend Wally before Jonathan says it,
he's wanting to jump.
I wasn't going to say anything.
Not just a Calvinistic reading of Esther to talk about the sovereignty of God. It actually goes back. There's a term, Hester Banim, which is a Jewish theological concept.
Word.
Right? It literally means hidden face. And it's interesting that some scholars even interpret Esther's name because apparently it sounds like the word hidden in Hebrew. And so this theme seems to run through. So Jonathan, for you, like Esther, it's just probably a made up name on purpose, right?
That was a shot across the bow just in case you tried to disagree with me.
So what does Esther mean again?
It's contested, but in Hebrew, some of the rabbis said it meant hidden in Hebrew as an allusion to God's hidden countenance, which is a reference to Deuteronomy 31:18, where God declares he will abide his face in response to Israel's unfaithfulness. And so that theme of the hiddenness of God, I think, is going to be really, really important. Of what do we do? What do we do with that? What do we do with a God that literally does not seem to, on the surface, doesn't seem to be active inside of a very, very messy soap opera, like a Game of Thrones type episode where there's violence and sex and drunkenness? Where is God in all this? That's, I think, one of the biggest questions that we're gonna do.
Well, what I was going to say, and I wasn't going to push back on Wally, but what I was going to say though was, I heard a sermon a couple of weeks ago, Mike Erie at Journey Church. He was talking about Ephesians 5, and he said sometimes we don't properly put certain verses in context. So there's this, and y'all are going to have to help me out. There's this good graduation, or maybe about America, that God has the plans for us. What's that? Jeremiah.
For I know the
God
plans that I
knows-
had. Jeremiah 29.
God
Yep.
knows.
For I know the
Go ahead,
plans I
say
have
it.
for you,
Yeah.
plans to prosper.
Go ahead, say it.
Not the,
Yeah. So was that given to America?
No,
No, it was given to whom?
to the exiles
Israel. It was given to Israel
while in exile. And
when they were dispersed in the diaspora. So it was a proclamation that God's going to like, you're about to go into exile, and it's going to be a long time, but just know that there's going to be a other side of that exile. That diaspora will come back, And I will establish what I started in Genesis 1. Does everybody agree with that?
Yes, but there's also
Okay. Yeah.
principles that we can apply to our situation.
Yeah, but let's just at least say what the original Jeremiah comment had nothing to do with America or Costa Rica. Yeah, it had nothing to do with that.
18 has been the most abused verse in the Bible, where it talks about, if my people will call by my name, will humble themselves and pray, and they talk about, if just America would get on their knees and pray. That's not talking about a nation; it's talking about a people.
That's right. So my point
is city on a hill talking about America. I've got bad news for you. That was not the context of that when Jesus said that as well.
And by the way, this is a perfect point. So we're not bashing America here. We're not bashing Yahweh. We're not saying that God's not going to bless America or its citizens, but it doesn't come from those verses necessarily. That's not the point of those verses. Those verses were given in a specific context, in a specific paradigm for a specific purpose. It doesn't mean there's not truth there. But my point being here, if you're sitting in Persia in 4th century BC and you believe that God, Yahweh, is going to bring you out of that and establish you back to where you were one day, the day of the Lord, right? When the Messiah comes back. Wouldn't you think it would be a great story to hear at bedtime? Almost hyperbolic, exaggerated, like a comedy, to say, this is the silliest thing I've ever heard, that there's this King Xerxes and this guy named Haman who's actually going to annihilate the Jews, maybe just in Persia. That's the funniest thing ever, because Yahweh's that is too big and his plans are too great. Is that not fair?
We already know in the context of this book that the exiles are already heading back, right? They've been in
building the wall, rebuilding the temple.
So we know that there's already a fulfillment of the promise that God made to his people. It says, hey, you're going to be in captivity for 70 years, but after 70 years, they're going to bring you out. And with the declaration of Cyrus in his first year to bring a group of people back to rebuild the temple, we see God already fulfilling this promise. So they're already understanding that God is working and fulfilling this promise. So, why did we
I'm just trying to make the argument
with Esther?
This is the point. So why is it in the canon? I don't know. I'm not God, and I wasn't the person to put it in the canon. But for me, it would be, if I think this is a comedy, even what I would call a farce, and farce is not what we would say. I've got a definition of farce, which is really cool. And I'm not going to read it right now because I can tell Wally's already rolling his eyes. But wouldn't it be really cool that you could tell your kids and you could tell your neighbors, I've got a funny story to tell you. This is the ridiculousness of what could have happened or did happen, but we're going to make this exaggerated, that there's this king and this servant to the king that actually thought he was going to annihilate the Jews. Isn't that the funniest thing ever? Because that could never happen.
That's what Purim is, right? Even the Jewish holiday that is celebrated today, to your point, Jonathan, that's what they do. They dress up the kids in costumes. They literally play out the story during the day. They drink a little bit too much wine. They eat a lot of food, because in Esther, you're going to see it's a book about parties and banquets.
There's 10 of them.
Kosher parties and banquets?
Well, we don't. Yeah, we don't. That would be Esther 2.0, I believe, not Esther 1.0. So yeah, I think that point is like even validated more by even the celebration itself shows some of those exaggerated pieces in the fact that like God is sovereign and he's working behind the scenes. The name itself, Purim, means dice, right? And I think that's another thing that we're going to talk about is why? That would be my question. If you're going to call a holiday something about this whole scenario, why not call it Esther Day or Freedom Day?
And I just have a question. This sort of came to me. Should the book be called Mordecai instead of Esther? Isn't Mordecai sort of the main?
Who's the hero of the story? You're moving into who's the hero of the story.
Isn't Mordecai one sort of orchestrating all the events? He's telling Esther what to do. He's the one that's saving the king. He's the one that's sort of.
Oh my gosh! Coming from a great complementarian.
I'm not.
The man's the hero, not the woman.
God. I mean, I think the purpose of the thing is to show that God is the hero of the story, even without mentioning his name. But he's moving through events. God is moving through events and people to bring his purposes about. And so, but I'm just wondering, Esther is a role player in this. She enters the beauty pageant because Mordecai tells her to. She goes to the king because Mordecai tells her to. He's one that sort of Mordecai seems to.
So you're saying that So Mordecai really had no power to get anything effectual done other than telling the person that had the power to get it done.
Telling the woman. Yes.
Oh,
So,
coming from a great complimentary.
like, I think the book is going to show like character flaws in just about everybody, and it's going to elevate some acts. And I think, Wally, to your question, I think part of the reason that people focus on Esther is you have these really famous lines of where Mordecai says,
Such a time as
for
this.
such a time as this. And you have the beautiful line, if I perish, I perish, you know,
Yep.
like that is the moment that everybody remembers. And there is something, I think, and we can argue about this in future episodes. I think there's a lot about power dynamics that are in this story from literally from page one. And Esther kind of flips some of those dynamics. It's so much so that she actually does something later on that is totally, it's a role reserved for men in that society. And she does it, and it's a big deal. So I won't get into it yet, but that's kind of a teaser for.
That's your egalitarian pushback, Wally.
No, because I actually know that Wally believes like this thing too, because we've read some of the same people. But I think that's going to be really interesting to talk about the reversals that happen in this story, because everything, it's like an arc in the story. It starts one way with Haman being up top and Esther being low, and then it's just like a big U shape, and it just flips.
What do we call that, Jonathan?
We call that a chiasm.
Oh, is Esther a chiastic structure? Is it a
Yes, apparently it is. Do tell.
no?
What's the chiasm here?
No, you're the chiasm master at.
No, not on this one. I think, Tim, we talked yesterday, and you mentioned a great thing about there's a flip between this. To go to Wally's point, to support Wally what he said, we do have this. We have Esther. We have Esther as kind of this catalyst, but the story does compare and contrast the rise and fall of Haman and the rise and the fall and rise of Mordecai, and in the middle, the stories that are actually almost exactly mirror, just the opposite persons getting either.
Oh my goodness,
You
Jonathan,
know,
do you realize what you
elevated
just
or-
did? You just got the name of our podcast, The Rise and Fall of Haman.
That's the new name of this,
You're not
of
really-
this series.
That would be hilarious.
I'm telling you, Driscoll's going to come after y'all, and I'm not going to be part of this.
Ain't scared.
I'm not scared of Russell Moore. I'm scared of Mark Driscoll. So there you go.
I interrupted you, Jonathan, but go ahead.
No, that was it. That was what I was going to say since Wally put me on the spot.
I
But
put
yeah,
you
I
on
mean,
this. I just led you to what you wanted to say anyway.
No, I just like, but I mean, this goes to the point of Esther. Wally said it earlier. This is play. It's almost like stage on, stage off. Do this, say this. We're at our fourth feast. Now we're at our seventh feast. This is what's going to happen here. This is what you're going to say. Really fantastic literary, but you have this chiasm in the middle of this comedic play almost of trying to explain the sovereignty of God and how he will not let his people perish because his love endures forever and he's faithful to all generations.
He made a covenant to Abraham that he does not break. Right. This
The fun thing for me, Wally and Tim, is, and I know you may not agree, but it is this comedic narrative of probably real people in such a way that I think the people sitting in Persia or wherever, not in Jerusalem, that were reading this, there was almost this lightheartedness of this fun part of it, but it's bringing some solidity and some comfort to, yeah, my Yahweh will never let his people perish. I mean, eternally. That's what I mean.
is it an issue for you that God is not mentioned one time? The name of God, Elohim, is not mentioned. I mean, not even the Persian gods are mentioned. Is that
My answer is no, because God allowed it to be in the canon, so it must be okay.
Sunday school answers are not accepted here. No.
Too late.
Well,
Too late.
to be fair, there are a lot of commentators that will actually say what you just said and go, that proves it's actually just a secular book. It's not talking about God at all. But I think most scholars would say, and I would agree with this, is that the absence, it's a very Jewish thing in that it doesn't just state, here's what I want you to get. It leads you to it of, oh man, like, where's God like in that instance? And then you go to the next one, where's God there? It leads you to that question, which in a sense, Jonathan, even though the name of Yahweh isn't mentioned and God is never mentioned, you're actually more focused on God because he's not mentioned. And that seems very like a very Eastern Jewish way of looking at the text.
Well, I just find it interesting that here is this last book, probably written time-wise, that we have within the Old Testament, that the name of God is not mentioned. And I'm thinking within the context of the history of Israel and the Jewish people, we have 400 plus years of God being silent from this book until the coming of Jesus.
Right.
And so you have, what do I do with a God that seems to be hidden? Does he care? The Israelites, when they were in slavery in Egypt, for 400 years plus, even though God had told I keep saying that, Abraham in Genesis 15, that, hey, your people are going to be enslaved in a country not their own for 400 plus years, but after that, they're going to come out with great riches and wealth, and they're going to come into their land. We have 400 years of people trying to do an apologetic of why we can't see God.
Isn't it interesting? It just struck me that in that 400 years of silence, that is when Esther 2.0 was written. It's like you're craving, like, okay, God, where are you? Where are you? Well, we're gonna add some things to Esther to make it clear. Hey, when it doesn't look like God is there, look, he's right here, which I think is really interesting.
So
Okay, but when you say interesting, do you think it's better? Do you think it's more full? Do you think it's a wrong edit of what God gave us in the Hebrew text?
It's a beautiful picture of the way that God interacts with his people and how they respond. So now, I know that's maybe a slightly evading your actual question, which is Esther 2.0, should it be in our Protestant Bible? Which I am not qualified to answer that. But what I will say is we should appreciate it for what it is, which is, I think, a beautiful thing. It's a people that recognize in the midst of the silence that we think we hear, that we have a God that actually is active, whether we see it or not.
I had one of the commentaries I was reading concerning it, and it was saying that when God is most hidden, he still is present, working to protect and deliver his chosen people. As a overarching narrative to this story, and then also an overarching narrative we have for how God works within his chosen people, the Jewish people, and then how God works within the context of his creation and all of his people, especially within us as believers and his church.
And what's really interesting about that is not just how he works, but in Esther, he's working through incredibly flawed characters to the point that you're like, I think that's one of the conversations that we're going to have is, what do we do with that? Because yes, if part of the point of Esther is to show that God is, even in his hiddenness, is sovereign and is controlling things, like the people do some like good things in the book, obviously, that we're going to talk about. But what do you do with the fact that through violence, through sex, through drunkenness, through parties, that's the way that God is like working through here? I think we have to deal with that, because I've seen a lot of Christians that will justify a lot of things based on God is sovereign and he's going to do whatever he's going to do anyway. So the means justify the ends. In other words, even if there's shortcuts, and we've talked about this previously before, but I think that's something that we have to wrestle with here as well. So let me ask you this as we wind down today. We asked this in Jonah, and I just alluded to it a little bit, but what do you guys think? Is there a main point to Esther? Is there a reason? Is it just to establish Purim? And this kind of goes a little bit to Jonathan's question from earlier too. Or is it more than that? Or are there multiple points? Is it just a satire that we're to laugh at?
What does Adele say?
Adele says over and over that the purpose of Esther, the story and the canonization, would be to have the etiology, the origin story of Festival of Purim. Now, let's just go to Purim real quick, and I'll let you answer, because I know it's going to be about sovereignty and God's electness and all that. But Purim is the only non-Torah festival mentioned in the Bible. So that means there were festivals that were established in the first 5 books of the Tanakh, the Torah. This is the only non-Torah festival actually mentioned in the full Old Testament Tanakh. Did you know that?
Yes.
Only non-Torah festival that's celebrated that's actually mentioned in the Tanakh. So there's other festivals that are mentioned there are other festivals that occur that are not mentioned in the Torah, this is the only non-Torah festival that's actually mentioned in the Tanakh.
Interesting.
And it's the one that was not told to be instituted by God himself, right?
It was an edict by a king. I mean, isn't that funny?
2.0 though, does it like have God like putting his stamp of approval on it?
I don't know.
I'd have to go back and
I don't
and
have a
look.
clue.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but
So anyway, I think it's kind of, and you know, I don't have the answer to all that. That's what I'm saying. I think this is why this book, we read it so we can build new church buildings, such as time as this. You need to step up and give your money.
And I've been a part of that theme for a church building project.
So that's my point here. You know, it's just like Jonah, it's just about, you know, the fish and getting swallowed up. And is the fish real? Is the fish not real? Is it male? Is it female? You know, at the end of the day, there is something there other than you have a queen that's married a non-Jewish Persian king who's saving all the Jewish people because of this one little edict that Haman writes up. You know, there's got to be something more to it, not just the style, not the genre, but there is truth in here, and there is something that Yahweh wanted us to have.
yeah, I think to your point, and like even the idea of people that have used this book for a building campaign, or I've heard all sorts of, you know, we often will do like, how have you heard this taught wrong? This one will be, I think, an easy one, because one of the things when you read any narrative, especially in the Old Testament, is there's a danger in people taking something out of the story and trying to make it their point. In other words, like they'll put their worldview on it rather than letting the story just be the story. So I think that's something that even as we talk about it, we have to be on guard for, that we're not taking our lens of the world and just overlaying it onto the book. So any other thoughts on?
Well, I think for me, my wife is doing the Bible recap with a friend of hers, and if you're looking for a good process for you to read through the Bible, understand Scripture on a level, I would encourage you to do the Bible recap. And one of the
what's that Bible recap? Right, real quick, is that by a lady that has a little video? Rachel's doing that.
It's a fantastic.
Oh, Rachel does it every day.
Yeah.
It's so annoying. She reads her Bible every day and listens to this video every
Unbelievable.
day.
Yeah.
It makes me feel guilted and shamed. But anyway.
Hey,
no,
Jonathan, are you supposed to lead her? Like in that? Sorry.
I saw.
It's an egalitarian household there. So,
I know.
But crud. Now, so one of the questions that they ask that this process asks is, what does this text say about God? It takes it away from, okay, this text is about me and what I'm supposed to get from it, and how am I supposed to, you know, what's it saying about me? And it takes a much larger view of Scripture. It says, okay, it's not about me. This is not a love letter written to Wally. It is God's word that is written to reveal something about himself that's true, that we can cling to, hold to, and believe in. And so for me, the question is, as entering this book of Esther, is, what does this story in the Scriptures have to say about who God is, his nature and character?
Which is interesting,
And
right?
what do you think? And what do you think it is? Just, I mean, you don't have to give me the full version. Just,
He has an acronym called TULIP that'll explain it really well.
No, it's called Guts. God's up to something.
Oh, no, he did not go there. No.
I like that.
And that's why I have the edit button on the podcast. But, you know, it's a great point, Wally, because actually that is, if you remember with Jonah, that's what we came down to, is that it was actually much less about Jonah and much more about the character of a God that was including people that for the most part in that time, the Jews did not want to include their enemies in, you know,
and Jonah would be the
grace.
least likely person that you want to choose to be a part of this prospect of sharing with this heathen nation.
Exactly.
And just like a concubine that wins a beauty contest because the previous wife didn't show up to a certain party at a certain time, all of a sudden saves all the Jews.
Correct.
I mean,
it's baffling. Yeah, absolutely. And that, if you're not familiar with the story of Esther, you're going to see some weird sexual things. You're going to see a lot of drunkenness. You're going to see some Game of Thrones like political maneuvering, and all of this somehow results in Purim, and it results in like the freedom for the Jewish people. So it's going to be a fun story. It's going to be fun to get into and to wrestle with all sorts of different things. So I hope you'll join us for this series. We've got a lot more to go. Next week, we're going to dive into Esther chapter 1. So have a great week, everyone. We will see you next time.